Hi there, I'm Rick Partlow. Welcome back to How to Write Science Fiction That Doesn't Suck. I just finished my 80th novel recently, started on number 81, and I was thinking about endings. I was thinking about what makes a good ending in a science fiction novel. Any novel, really, but I write science fiction, I read a lot of science fiction, so I was thinking about that in particular. And I started thinking about books that I love that did not have the best endings. And I was thinking if, great writers who write excellent novels, who sell hundreds of thousands or millions of copies, still can't get the ending right, is there hope for someone like you and me, someone who's not, Neil Stephenson or Stephen King, to write a really good ending? And I think there is. I think that there's two different skills at work here. And one of them is writing a compelling novel, and the other is writing a compelling ending. And you can have the first skill and know how to write and captivate people and keep their attention and still not know how to write a good ending. Not all of my endings have been great, but I like to think that all of my endings have been satisfying. Definitely in series and hopefully in the individual books. Now, there is a danger there, danger of the current model of genre science fiction, in that everybody wants to write long series. If they're successful, you want to keep them going. So sometimes the first book may not have a great ending because you're trying to continue things and leave people wanting the next book. But I try to avoid that. I try to make each book have a satisfying ending, unless it's just a cliffhanger for the next book, which can happen. But even then, I like to finish off the story arc that I've started and leave the teaser for the next one. But I was thinking about specifically, there's a book that I love called Snow Crash. You may have read it, by Neil Stephenson. And its ending is dramatically effective and satisfying, but there's two parts to an ending, and Stevenson gets one part. The first part of the ending is the climax. You bring all of your action to a head, you bring all the plot lines together, and you bring them to a satisfying conclusion with a dramatic and explosive and satisfying climax scene where the bad guy gets his and the good guy gets, to save the day or gets revenge or whatever the motive is. But there's also the second part, and that's the denouement. I'm pronouncing it the fancy French way because I took French in college. The denouement is when you have the people afterwards dealing with the climax, dealing with what has happened, about to go their separate ways or about to go on with their lives. And apparently some writers don't feel that that's necessary. They don't feel that giving the readers some kind of closure with the characters is necessary. For instance, in Snow Crash, Stevens has introduced you to all these incredibly complex, morally complex characters, and there's about 6 of them, I think, if I'm remembering right, and he only tells you what happens to like 3 of them. And the others, you don't know if they died, you don't know if they went to jail, you have no idea what went on with these people, and he doesn't think it's worth his effort to tell you. For instance, there's this older, if I remember right, it's been a while since I read it, but like a mafia style guy who's the protector of this female character, and he saves her in the end, and he gets really gravely wounded. And she is kind of looked at him as almost like a father figure, yet as he's being taken away in the ambulance, doesn't even check on him. It doesn't not the character, but the writer doesn't show her caring what happens to him. The writer doesn't show what happens to any of the people in that situation. They're just kind of like, oh, it just ended, and I want to know. It's not like a Lady and the Tiger type of situation where the author is leaving to the imagination of the reader what the conclusion will be. It's not like that. It's more like, this wasn't worth my effort to write this. Maybe he felt like it would drag down the pacing of the end of the novel, but for me, I felt like a paragraph was not going to drag down the pacing of the end of the novel. And I've seen that in a lot of books. One of my favorite books of all time, Footfall by Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle. There's a scene in the end where the Orion spaceship is taking on the Fthip, I think they were called, aliens in space. Well, there's stuff going on the ground too, and all sorts of different battles happening. And in the end, you get one of the people who is a captive on the ship accepting the alien's surrender. But he doesn't bother, and he gives you the fate of a couple of characters who die. He doesn't bother to tell you what happened to the people on the Orion spaceship. Because there's a couple of characters in there that were still alive last I checked, and but the ship has taken heavy damage. It doesn't mention anything. That's like the end of the book, puts the foot on the chest of the baby elephant alien to accept its surrender, and that's the end of the book. There's so many characters that you don't know what happened to them, and it's just like, was it not worth it for you guys to tell us? To just have like a paragraph, an epilogue, anything? Maybe that was an editor's choice. Maybe they wanted to do it, and the editor said, no, we're not going to do that. It's hard to say because, I wasn't there. Jerry Pournelle's passed away. Larry Niven's probably not going to tell me. So I'm curious as to whether it was their choice or the editor's. I'm in a position writing, for smaller presses and being fairly successful that I don't have editors tell me you need to lose this part of your book anymore. That doesn't happen. When I had a literary agent back at the start of when I tried to be a traditionally published author, the literary agent's editors did tell me to lose several things from books, and I cut a prologue from Duty, Honor, Planet. I cut several things out of Birthright, but and now I can write what I feel the story should be naturally, and I think that that's an advantage because if somebody like Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle or Neil Stevenson had an editor tell them, oh, you have to cut out this epilogue, that's some pretty ballsy editor there, considering that they're all legends. But I don't know that happened. I'm just guessing. But it's something that as an independent writer, author, and small published author, you usually don't get scenes like sliced out of your book wholesale. You may at the beginning, if you're just starting and you go to somebody like Athon or Variant or Raconteur or whoever, the editor may say, you're just starting. This isn't necessary. You need to tighten this up. But once you get to the point where you've got a successful career as an author, usually they're not going to come say that to you. And I mean, if you're watching this, maybe you are just starting, and you may need to take the advice of the editor and cut that part out. But I'm speaking in terms of like established writers, like I said, Nevin and Pornell and Stevenson. And I don't know that an editor told them to cut that out. But if they did and they cut it out, then that's a trad thing that happens. I know it happens to other writers. I wasn't aware if it happened to someone as big as them, but it could have. But if you get successful in the indie world, it's probably not going to happen to you. But I'm going to give you an example of what I think a good way to deal with a denouement is. In Wholesale Slaughter, the Wholesale Slaughter series, in book 6, the final book, spoilers for if you haven't read it, but there's a whole bunch of loose threads that are hanging out there in book 6. There's the main character was made basically the king of his kingdom and rejected it to go rescue his wife when she was heavily pregnant and captured by the enemy. And there's his mentor who was kind of turned against him by a pretender to the throne after his father was killed. There's the people who used to be the enemy who are now kind of part of an alliance. There's all these threads hanging there. And in the end, in the denouement, I bring them together and I explain what's going to happen to the main character now that, he's not the king anymore, what he's going to be instead. I explain that him and his wife, they're going to have that kid. The guy who used to be his mentor is going to be the king, and the enemies are going to be their allies. I bring that all together, and it's not a very long epilogue. It's just, maybe 2,000 words. But I feel like I did that successfully. I feel like I brought those elements together in a satisfying ending. And I think that you, as you bring your books or series to an ending, should strive to not. I'm not talking about having like a Return of the Jedi movie ending, which I loved that, but that's Tolkien, and that's a movie series that had built up a lot of goodwill. So having one ending after another, one denouement after another, kind of worked, and people still make fun of it a little bit, but I loved it. But you're not Tolkien, and you're not Peter Jackson, so I'm not talking about having like one epilogue after another where you show every character walking back to their house and dealing. I'm talking about a centralized thing where you can show your readers what is going to happen without spelling out everything for them. I mean, if you have an anti-hero who's in trouble with the law and you want to show that they're not going to go to jail, or at least not for very long, you could have one of the other characters say, yeah, I talked to the prosecutor and they're going to take it easy on him. Something like that. Just a line. That's the difference between caring enough about how your readers feel about a character to give them some kind of a closure, and just saying, the heck with it. I'm not going to bother because I shouldn't have to. No, people will get ticked off at you for that. I have gotten ticked off reading books where the end of the book leaves all that stuff up in the air. Like, hey, he might go to prison for this, or he's still got these people trying to kill him, or he never told this girl that the reason he ran away from her was because there was killers on his tail. All kinds of things that you're like, why haven't we been shown that they're at least trying to fix this? It feels like not laziness, but kind of, entitlement in a way, like I'm the author and I don't want to show that, so you don't need to read it. Well, yes, we do. We want to read it. And if you don't give us what we won't read your next book. Now, I did read another Neil Stephenson book, but it did take me off a little. I got to the point where I checked with other people if the ending was satisfying before I read the book. Stephen King is notorious for bad endings, not for the lack of a denouement, but just for his inability to bring all the plot threads together into something that doesn't feel like a deus ex machina. But, Stephen King's got a lot of problems structurally, but he writes such compelling characters and such, scenes and situations that just grab the reader that it doesn't matter, and you can be successful, obviously, without having the skill to write a great ending. And knowing how to write a great ending doesn't mean you're going to write a great book. So, I don't know that I call my books great, but I can write a great ending. And I think that's one of my skills. So, writing a satisfying climax is a separate skill from writing a satisfying denouement. But you need to, when you're plotting your book, plotting out the climax of the book is one of the most important things you can do. Now, a lot of people, they get the climax of the book first. They say, this is how it's going to end. This is what the battle's going to look like. But that's not quite the same thing, because you need to keep that ending in your head as you write, as you set things up in the first third of the book. As you go through the mushy middle, you need to make sure the plot threads all head in the same direction. What the mistake a lot of people make is their plot threads go, say there's 3 subplots. They'll go parallel to each other the entire book. And they will never weave into one and be brought to a head together. The book will have 3 different endings, and that kind of sucks. I mean, it can work, but I don't really like it when somebody has separate plot threads and they fail to bring them together in the end. For me, it feels like to really have a successful ending, you need to bring your plot threads to the same conclusion, the same climax. Now, maybe it's a minor subplot and you want to end that subplot before the main climax, and maybe you can get away with that, but I feel like a really successful novel, a really well-plotted novel, you're going to have those subplots all come together at the same time. There's, I guess the best illustration of this that I can give from my own work would be the Third Duty on Our Planet book, where I started plot threads in the first book that I didn't even really know were plot threads at the time because it was my first book ever. But when I wrote the second, I started to bring them forward and I understood where they were going. And then in the third book, every one of those things came together to a head at the end of the book. You had the alien, the plot by the alien AI to get Earth under a dictatorship so they could better face the enemy. You had the plot by the head of the this government agency to take over the government. You had various characters, personal issues. They all came together in the climax of that book. And I don't know. It's up to you whether you think I did that successfully. But I did bring those plot threads into one climax. And if you can do that, that's half the battle to writing a good ending. But it has to feel natural. It can't feel like, oh, it's a coincidence that this guy ran into this guy and they happen to be, trying to do the same thing. It has to feel like they all led there, like there was no other place they could go. So that is the two parts to writing a good ending: is the climax and the denouement. To recap, the climax needs to bring together all the disparate plot threads into one satisfying conclusion, and the denouement needs to at least give the readers a taste of what's going to happen to these people in the future. You don't need to say, like a fairy tale, they lived happily ever after, but you need to say, this is the direction their life is going. This is what they're going to follow. They're going to become this. They're going to become that. They're going to try to do this. These characters are going to try to make their relationship work. This guy died. This character got a message from them that they recorded before their death. Like the thing from like Endgame when Tony Stark recorded the message. So that's an Endgame. There's a denouement for you. You may have various opinions about superhero movies. I thought Endgame was one of the best things I've ever seen in the movies. And the denouement of that movie was just gut punch. I mean, the whole recording by Tony with the scenes from all the people going back to their lives, and then the funeral and the Guardians leaving with Thor, I thought that was incredible denouement. And that was a denouement for like 23 movies over a 10-year period. So most of your denouements are not going to have to take that much content and bring it to a close. But if you just have one book or one trilogy or one 6-book series, you need to give your readers not a complete explanation, but you need to give them a sense of where the characters are going after the book is over. Because for me, if you wrote the book well, if you wrote the characters well, I'm going to care about them. I'm going to identify with these characters. And if you don't say there's hope, that they're heading in this direction, then I'm going to feel unsatisfied. All right. Well, that is all for this episode, and I will try to get these things out more often now. Now that I have my technical problem solved. So I will talk to you guys next time. And if you want to contact me, you can go to facebook.com/Duty Honor Planet, which is the science fiction worlds of Rick Partlow, or you can contact me at dutyhonorplanet487@gmail.com. Thanks, and have a good one.